Gwyneth Evans, driving a front-wheel drive rally car for the first time, was out in the Ford RS 2000. He too was one to watch in the Formula 2 battle, which here promised to be very entertaining indeed. Wilson was flying on the opening stages, the car had no problems, and once he'd overhauled Kenny McKinstry, he was pulling further and further away up front. Not only did it look like a rally win for Wilson, it looked like a championship for him as well. McKinstry had booked in late to a time control early in the day, for which he got a 10-second road penalty. Later in the day, the power steering failed on the Subaru, hardly an auspicious start to the event for him. Tommi Makinen had a spin in 5th gear early on, which bent a front strut, and then he had this puncture. Later in the day, he would slow on a stage due to a lack of petrol. Things weren't going according to plan for Makinen. Somebody else in puncture problems was Dieter Depping. Along with Peter Thul, he was able to make his way out of the St Mark's 1 stage, but a lot of time had been lost. The spectators looked on as the Golf of Sebastien Lindholm burst into view. Lindholm was complaining of unsuitable suspension, which was lifting the wheels far too much on the early stages. Despite that, he was able to press on regardless. With a dent in the door and the puncture repaired, Tommi Makinen was into the lead of the Formula 2 battle. His puncture cleared up, Dieter Depping now had a lot of time to make up with the Ford Escort Cosworth. The Greek-driven Nova was slipping back down the order in Formula 2 and being caught on the road by a hard-charging Stephan Finley. Finley on the Manx rally for the first time and hardly revelling in it due to his flu. The spectators out in force as the cars charged through the lanes. Finley, one of those, to go and greet the fans. Locking up, sliding up the road at the escape road, he was fortunate not to hit anybody. Dieter Depping was now getting into his stride and hurling the Escort Cosworth up the order. The Vauxhall Nova of the Greek driver Ieropoulos was still having a real fight to stay in touch in the Formula 2 battle. Bertie Fisher, meanwhile, was going extremely well in his Subaru, despite a puncture which dropped into 4th later in the day. Tyre marks on the road gave evidence to people that had gone up escape roads. One of those was Fisher, his very damaged Subaru limping out of the stage. Bodywork damage as well as a puncture. No wonder he slipped back down the field. Frank Meager had been going well early on with his Escort, but then a blown turbo dropped him right down the order. The team were able to change it, but it left him with a lot of work to do on legs 2 and 3. David Llewellyn, still going well in the Formula 2 battle with the Vauxhall Astra, had brake problems all day. At over 80 miles an hour, the brake pipe eventually burst. He had a complete brake failure and was lucky not to involve any spectators. Alistair McRae, in contrast, had a broken throttle cable. It all meant that Tommi Makinen's life in Formula 2 was getting considerably easier. Martin Rowe, still dominating in Group N with his Ford Escort Cosworth. And as the battle raged on behind him in Group N, his lead was able to increase. His knowledge of the road standing him in good stead. Mark Higgins, his rival in Group M, a fellow Manxman, was likely to be a real threat. Dramas, though, for Gary Leese and Pauline Taylor with the Sierra Cosworth. Hazard lights going, the Sierra limped its way through the stage. Scott Bradshaw and Anthony Cashin, Manxmen both, were going well with their Vauxhall Astra. A driver's eye view of the tight but fast lanes of the Isle of Man, and very shortly, a slower car perhaps ahead. Driver and co-driver working well together, being guided across the island as quickly as possible. Round the sharp left-hander, the Sierra ahead. Through one of the man-made chicanes designed to slow the cars down, and then on a narrow road and a big wide car ahead, there was just room to squeeze the Astra past Gary Leese. Bradshaw and Cashin out of the hunt for overall victory in Formula 2, but going well nonetheless. Day 2 was all about Malcolm Wilson. The Ford Escort continued to lead, and its lead continued to increase. There was drama early on, however, as the wipers failed on special stage 21. Despite that, he was still quickest. Wilson was giving a fine example of how to drive a turbocharged supercar on tight tarmac roads. The opposition could do little about the Cumbrian. It looked as though rally victory and championship victory were almost his. Kenny McKinstry was still challenging in that second place. He'd chosen the wrong tyres originally, but then, having lost that time, he was going all out to make it back up once again. The legacy that he was driving, rather than the more up-to-date Impreza, was still in flamboyant fashion. McKinstry equal to the task. He'd end day 2 in second place, although dropping away from Malcolm Wilson. He was over a minute behind, and it rather looked a forlorn hope of victory. Dieter Depping on the Manx rally for the first time had altered the suspension on the Escort for day 2. It meant that the car was handling much better, but then he had engine bothers on the Tinwald stage. Nonetheless, Depping was impressing many out on a British Championship event for the first time. Along with Peter Thul, the man who had co-driven for Armin Schwarz on last year's RAC rally, Depping was into third place and looking to claim a top 3 finish at the end of the rally. In Formula 2, Tommi Makinen was still leading and was still as flamboyant as ever in the Nissan. And then on the Tinwald stage came drama. The dipstick came loose and the engine caught fire. Thankfully, the flames were able to be extinguished, but it was disaster for Makinen and for Nissan after the early promise shown by the man who had won the Thousand Lakes Rally earlier on in the year. The Volkswagen Golfs with their 6-speed gearboxes were quick but fragile. Sebastien Lindholm was fast on his day, but still the niggling reliability problems of the car were impeding him. The cars had had revised steering arms made at exceptionally short notice, while they didn't seem to have affected the performance of the cars greatly. It was encouraging for the SBG team to see the pace of the Volkswagens, but they needed more work on the reliability of the cars. Stephan Finley slid off the road twice on the second day. It dropped him a little further away from the leaders, but he was still going well, despite the fact that he was driving with flu. Along with co-driver Campbell, he was up to third by the end of the day, as a result of the demise of Bertie Fischer. Escorts first and third.